Amazing. Well, thank y'all so much for coming here tonight. Like we said, we're super stoked that you're spending your time with us. And before we move on to anything else, we wanted to start and to center a land acknowledgement. Because tonight we're going to talk a lot about the outdoors, about farming, about race, and also just about like living in the world. And all these things, pretty unsurprisingly, are intrinsically tied to the land, which is in turn bound up with the people who have lived on that land and with that land for generations. So at Dartmouth, we're, as we know, on what remains to this day to be ancestral and unceded Abenaki land. And this is a tenuous acknowledgement that we should sit uncomfortably with tonight and keep with us throughout this discussion, especially for those of us who are settler colonizers on this land. In a moment, I'm going to drop a few links in the chat with resources for people to learn more, and also a few that are useful for monetary reparations. And then Latria, if you want to speak a moment about whose land you're on.
Yeah, so hi you all. I'm coming to you from Spartanburg, South Carolina, and this is Catawba land. It's on the Catawba-Cherokee border, the eastern band of the Cherokee. And the Catawba are the only federally recognized tribe here in South Carolina, and they're named after the Catawba River, but they were primarily in the Southeast and in this region, this section of South Carolina.
Cool, thank you so much. And also, I should probably introduce myself. My name is Rachel. I use she, her, hers, and I'm a 21. And Michelle, you want to?
And I'm Michelle. I'm also use she, her, hers. I'm a 21. And I will begin by just introducing our incredible speaker. So Latria Graham is a journalist and fifth-generation South Carolina farmer. Her work stands at the intersection of food, social justice, sports, and culture. She's written long-form pieces about everything from farming to NASCAR. She's a graduate of Dartmouth College and later earned her MFA in creative nonfiction from the New School in New York City. She's a three-time Best American Sports Writing winner, notable for her stories on athletes in places of tension, primarily Standing Rock and Flint. She received a bronze level case award for reporting on immigration policy that stemmed from 2017's Executive Order 13769, often referred to as the travel ban. Her work has been featured in the New York Times, LA Times, The Guardian, ESPNW, Southern Living, and Garden and Gun. You can find more of her work at latriagraham.com.
Dang. So before we get into all that, because that is an incredible bio, we're going to talk a lot more about all those things. We did just want to lay down a few ground rules. So first of all, like I said, especially for all y'all joining, you probably just heard the automated voice as soon as you logged on. This meeting is being recorded, and it will most likely be published at a later time. There also are closed captions for your convenience. I think there's a way that you can turn those off if you don't want to see them. And just to speak a little bit about the format that we're going to have tonight, we'll probably have about 30 or 35 minutes of a conversation between Michelle, myself, and Latria. And then after that, we're going to leave plenty of time for questions from you all. So to ask those questions, you can head to the Q&A section, and we'll be like able to look at those. Those questions will only come to us. They won't be visible to other attendees. And then we will get to pose those to Latria. And the last thing, this probably goes without saying, but it is important nevertheless. We just want to be really clear that tonight there is no room for hate or prejudice of any type, including but not limited to racism, classism, ableism, and sexism. And so on that note, let's kick it off. As I mentioned, that was a pretty awesome bio, Latria. And so my question for you, just to start things off, is how did you get here? Specifically, because this is kind of a series about careers, how did you navigate your career path? And definitely feel free to start off like as early as necessary for you.
Yeah. So that's fine. I will start with Dartmouth graduation and the great failure that was in some ways. So I am class of 2008. And if you remember what happened in 2008, it was the start of the Great Recession. So I graduated from Dartmouth a term late. And so I finished at the end of the summer semester, and I decided that I was going to move to New York City in the fall of 2008, because that's what you do when you want to be a writer. Again, this is early, not super early ages of the internet, but still New York City was the capital of publishing. It was the capital of magazines. The internet didn't allow us to connect. Google Drive was not a thing yet. So this is the place you were supposed to go to cut your teeth. But I realized, because I'm speaking, at least primarily, I think, to people in education or that may be defining their major and things like that, I should tell you I started out as a biomedical, I started out as pre-med, and then when I realized I could not deal with that, I went to biomedical engineering. And then I realized I was doing what my parents wanted me to do and what I thought my community needed, and not necessarily what I wanted to do. And I was severely unhappy and I had to take some time off. I did take a medical leave. There is no shame in that. There's no shame in taking time away from college for a little bit. I was very ashamed of it and sort of rushed through the back end of it. And that's why I want to tell you, even though you've read that super long bio, that the path was not linear. It definitely wasn't planned in this way. And to like give yourself, and I wish I'd given myself more time and more space, but like not to necessarily be ashamed of that struggle, because it's going to make you part of who you are. You realize you have some muscles and tools that you wouldn't have gotten any other way. So I did decide I was going to major in English and minor in theater. And I was like, what am I going to do? I guess I'll become a professor. You know, I'll teach if this writing thing kind of doesn't work out. But moved to New York City, went to go get a job. There were no jobs because it was literally Bear Stearns went down like the day I moved into my apartment. So sent out probably 100, 150 applications. And I wound up with a job as a library page, making minimum wage in New York City, commuting to the Upper East Side. And that's sort of where I learned, and this is less than I made at Dartmouth. So I'm literally making $7.25 an hour and trying to like live in one of the most expensive cities in the world. But it's where I learned to research. It is the second oldest library in the country. And so they have some of the oldest maps of the United States. I learned how to pull things, how to research, and it really expanded the critical thinking skills that I got at Dartmouth. I went on to get my MFA because I, again, think I want to teach and figure out how to do that. In my second year, my dad gets cancer and is not doing so well. So I commute back and forth between Spartanburg, South Carolina, where he is, and New York City. And the only thing that I know to do besides the bit of student teaching I'm doing is freelance. And the world has come along enough where you can pitch a story or an editor will assign you a story and you'll get paid for it. And that's the only way that I knew, because I had to be location independent. Now we think of it as contract work and gig working, but this is in 2013. So those terms are in their infancy. In some ways. And so, and freelancing has been around in terms of the creative life for a long time, but it was not something that was really discussed with us in graduate school. But I was like, I have to make money. I have to make money fast. And so this is something that I learned to do. And I've been kind of doing it ever since. My dad died in 2013. I spent some time thinking about the type of writer I wanted to be. And I wasn't sure what to do with that for a long time. So I was like, if I can't write about anything else, I know I can write about my dad. And so we live in Spartanburg. It is the training camp for the Carolina Panthers. Dad was a rabid football fan, like rabid. But because we had a farm, he never went during the summers to go see like these pro players, even though they were 5 miles from our house. And I was like, what would it be like to go there and see this and experience it? And hopefully I'll write about that. And ended up actually getting a story out of that. And it's called The Dark Knight Unmasked. And it was about Josh Norman, who went from being unhoused and sleeping on a couch to the highest paid cornerback in the NFL. And that happened that season. And that's also the season that the Panthers went to the Super Bowl. So I started out as a sports writer and realized that like I'm writing about people doing extraordinary things and not necessarily about sports. And started sort of crafting my lens other places and thinking about my food memories, right? Thinking about where I live in the land. And we started losing a lot of family members. We lost my dad. I lost 2 uncles and a grandmother in 1 year. And I realized that my culture was fading. And so I kept trying to capture as many parts of it as I could and work on figuring out how to like turn that into something. So in some ways, I'm still working with it. I'm still grappling with it. I'm still writing it down. So there was no sort of linear path. You really just sort of buckle up every day and like show up. We sort of say butt and chair, and you show up every day and you're like, okay, what's on my plate today? What can I make of it? And like, how do I get to the next thing? And some days it's exhilarating. Some days it's terrifying because you're freelance and you never know when you're going to get paid. You know, some people say they'll pay you on time, they don't. And you really learn how to run a business in addition to being a creative and dealing in art and letting curiosity fuel what you do when you can. So it's a mixture of both. I very much have to run my world like a business. I know how much I need to make every day in order to be a viable entity, to be able to go out and tell these stories, and know that if my computer breaks, I can replace it. If I need insurance, all of that sort of stuff. So that I don't want people to think it's just all art and flowers and sort of, I get to work whenever I want to and things like that. Sometimes there is panic when your computer won't turn on and you get the blue screen of death, and you are the person that has to fix it. Yeah. But it also allows me to make money off of my brain, and coming from a family that has mostly worked with their bodies in terms of field work and farming and things like that, it's a radical difference, and I'm grateful for it, even though there are still growing pains and panic associated with it. So that's a little bit of a long answer, but I want people to see
the ups and downs. Yeah, for sure. Man, I can, the only time I can think of that might be worse than graduating in 2008 is graduating in 2021. So if you've got any advice for Michelle and I, please pass it along.
We're not going to claim it. It's going to be okay. But why
yeah.
It will unfold as it will, and we will do what we can with what we have, right? Both years, it seemed like the time consumed, or how do I say this? Everything that happened in those 2 years, in 2008 and 2020, asked for more bandwidth than we had. And we just had to figure out how to do what we could with what was available to us. And it doesn't feel like failing. It feels like failing, but it's not. It's surviving. We are all doing the best we can right now in many, many ways. But 2021 being 2020, the sequel, is just, I'm struggling with that a little bit.
Yeah. I think we all are, for sure. Yeah. It's important to recognize. And a question I wanted to follow up though with you. So throughout all those ups and downs and hiccups and everything, do you feel that you've sort of arrived at a place where you know your voice as a writer? And I think, a lot of people here have probably read where here you just can't see us, and out there nobody can hear you scream. So we kind of have, from our perspective, you do have this really incredible voice that you assert yourself and express so beautifully. But in your opinion, what have you found that yet? Are you still looking for it? And if you have found it or in the process, how would you even describe it?
Yeah. I tried on a lot of different voices to get to this place. I think I'm mostly confident in the voice I have right now. And the reason I say that is I do about 40 assignments a year. At one point I was doing up to 55 assignments a year. So that's more than one a week. And so that means that I'm often writing for a bunch of different companies at the same time. So the Atlanta Journal-Constitution wants something different from the New York Times, which is going to want something different from ESPN, which has a completely different style Bible from Garden and Gun, right? And so I'm always trying to take my perspective and layer it over the top of the expectations of all of these different companies. And sometimes the fit doesn't work. Sometimes they need things to exist in a very tight and neat way that isn't necessarily the way I work. And so the tail end of 2020 was the first time that I felt really confident in my voice and could walk away and leave things on the table if they weren't serving me, or if they were trying to shove my voice into a place where it didn't fit. Because something that we've seen after the events of June and the performative Black squares is that a lot of people wanted to they wanted Black bodies, but they didn't want Black voices or Black perspectives, right? And so that is the crux of performative allyship. And so sometimes you get into an assignment and you realize this is not going to work, and do you compromise your voice and your integrity in order to complete the job and get paid? Or do you say, hey, it's best that we part ways? So I think I'm starting to become confident in that, but it's after almost a decade of trying to be someone else. There was she passed late last year. Her name was Julia Reed, and she worked for Vogue and wrote for Southern Living and Garden and Gun. And I remember the first assignment that my editor, Amanda Heckert at Garden and Gun, gave me, and it was an art piece. And Julia Reed had written the art piece before. I knew her work. I'd read the magazine for 10 years or something. And I wrote that piece just like Julia Reed.
Yeah.
And my editor calls me and she's like, hey, so can we talk about this for a second? And I was like, yeah, what's up? She's like, if I had wanted Julia Reed to write this, I would have asked Julia to write this, but I didn't want Julia to write this. I wanted you to write this. And so she's like, go back, like take what you see, use the words that you use, right? And rewrite this piece. And I did. And so like, that's always been, if I ever have to do a second or third draft of something, and that does happen. So like, I'm not always the like one take hot shot. There are moments that I am, but there are moments that I'm not. It's often because I am thinking too much about what the reader is going to think about me or what I've written, or I'm trying too hard to be someone else because that's what a magazine expects. And I'm like, now I'm like starting to become confident that people are hiring me for me. They know what I do, they understand what I do, that I do it well, and I do it professionally, and they're willing to compensate me for it. And like that is why they are here. So I hope it continues to be that way. But there are definitely moments of panic and doubt every time I turn in a draft.
Yeah, get the same feeling turning in a final assignment. So
yeah,
doesn't stop after college, it sounds like, but
it doesn't. You learn to grapple with it differently. I think you realize that there will always be some set of nerves there, but you realize that you've done it before and you've survived all the bad days and all the hard things, and you can, when it's time, you can show up and you can do it again.
Yeah. Well, and what I hear you talking about like having to carve out the space and like assert your voice is definitely something that I have experienced for myself in the outdoors, I think, as well, which I think is a place that can be really antagonistic towards a lot of different identities. And yeah, it can be a place that's like at times a little like ruthless, similar to the publishing world, it sounds like. Sounds like in both cases you have to be really resourceful and adaptive. But I know that one thing that's helped me along the way is like mentors who have been there to sort of guide me in finding my, my space. And I am wondering, in outdoors specifically, have you had any particular mentors who have helped you find that voice that you write so passionately with in the articles that I mentioned? Any mentors, that you look up to and that have just made you the person you are today?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I would have ever worked without the help of other people. So something that we talk about a little bit, and it's definitely both, and this is Outside Magazine. Sorry, I realized I dropped the end of that moniker, but something that both happens in the outdoors and happens in publishing is the gatekeeping is real. Right? There's always you're always sort of running up against the barriers of access or experience or being introduced to the right person. And so I worked on a story with a photographer named Andrew Cornerlack. It was about an NFL player, again, merging from sports writing to this other thing. Jason Brown was the highest paid center in the NFL, and he walks away from it, buys a farm in North Carolina, and gives away all the food that he grows. And I'm just kind of like, what? And I was like, I have to go talk to this guy. And Andrew was the photographer on that. And we just sort of started talking. And this is one of those things that like being, I don't want to say kind because people overuse the word kind, but being respectful to the person that you're partnered with. And learning more about what they do and what drives them and things like that, and having that conversation. And he's like, oh, I want to introduce you to my friend, Tracy Ross. She's an outdoor writer, and you sort of build community in this way. And she was like, oh, I'd like to introduce you to my editor, Alex at Outside. And that's how those leaps happen. And so there are people that I see their work, and it turns out I'd seen Andrew's work like maybe in 2014, and I didn't work with him till 2018 or 2019. So it's like I had studied magazines enough to know the photographers that were there, that were up for national magazine awards. I understood sort of the dynamic of magazines and how they worked and aesthetically what people were looking for, and being able to have that conversation and sort of talk about art, I think, in that way. But in terms of him, helping open doors for me, Tracy too, Glenn Stout was another big one in sports writing, and being able to, if I'm struggling with a story, that is someone that I knew that I could email and he'd email me back. There are a couple of people I think in the community that are incredibly nurturing and very gracious with their time, and I've learned a lot from them, and I try to do the same thing for others, because I realize when we talk about gatekeeping, there are people, whenever I do projects for Outdoor Retailer, and I don't take them, but I recommend other people, I'm like, these people would be working for you if you knew they existed. Let me bring them to you, right? Like, that's like, if somebody, I did a Black Excellence issue this summer for Outdoor Retailer, and the whole team was great on that. And I was like, I really want to give some people their first paychecks. I want them to get paid for their work. And you would not believe, poets are the best at like breaking news. Because they understand brevity, they understand word economy really, really well, right? You know, there was art in that issue. There were a lot of things that happened, and like I was grateful that they listened to some of my suggestions on that. But so, and the editor of that is Doug Schnitzbun, and he's over a couple of outdoor things. And, you know, I was like, hey, I want to try out some gear. I have a trip I want to do. And he's like, let's get you some gear, because let's get you to a gear reviewer position so that you are getting it in order to talk about it for these trips that you want and things like that. Because I can't afford the $700 tents. Like, even though I am a working professional right now in this industry, there are a lot of things that are up and away for me. And I also know if I have gear questions or am thinking about something, that I have access to these people. And so I try to be gratuitous with my knowledge wherever I can and explain things to people. So a couple of mentors there, Ebony Wilkins does a lot of social justice activism editing and sort of talking about ableism and things like that. I'm trying to think of a couple of other people, but yeah, like I have a community behind me and I know it, and I'm super grateful to them, and I'm always gonna accidentally leave off people's names. But you know, I just realized that like I didn't do it by myself, and I would still be running into some of these walls. And so like, that's why I really do try to write people back, like especially students and things that have questions about writing, if I can, and things like that. Sometimes it gets a little time consuming, but that's why I show up for classes. I talk about what I get paid for every story that I do, so that they understand that it's not just a pipe dream, that like, this is how, just like I talked about it being a business, like this is how my setup works. It may not work for you, but here's how you can try out those sorts of things.
Totally.
That's awesome. Yeah, well, thank you so much for giving us the hot goss, it feels like, for this really niche industry. Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I guess I am curious. You've done so much incredible work for outdoor-esque or outdoor industry media pieces or media outlets. And I'm curious, what is unique about this industry, you think, relative to the sports world, you know, to the various other things you've written for? What is so special about this place? If it is it welcoming? Is it hateful?
I realize I'm going to come from a privileged position in some ways, right? Because I came into this outdoor space. When we're talking about outdoor community, I came in as a writer for Outdoor Retailer. Like my time out in the woods on my own is often spent solo. So it is not, I have one or two maybe camp meetups with friends every year, but like I go out for a hike every week, and I would say out of like the 52, if I do 52 a year, 45 of those are by myself. And so most of my community is digital. And so it's, some of it is Instagram, some of it is, you know, you met someone at an Unlikely Hikers meetup or something like that, and you sort of, you know, text one another or whatever and check in and things like that. So I realized that like here in Spartanburg, South Carolina, my community is not as rich as it could be. But when you go to certain things, I'm also like the only big Black lady with purple hair. So they kind of know what I'm coming for, you know, whenever I sort of step into the room. I think because we're dealing with climate change and climate grief and some of these other incredibly urgent issues, at some point, people in the outdoors can be very introspective, and they're having conversations about what's missing. And in some ways, they're ahead of the curve for that reason, and understanding that sort of everyone has to be on board with things like sustainability, and a lot of the issues that America is grappling with come back to land, because America can't make any more land, really. Like, it is one thing that we cannot grow, so we have to deal with what's here, the history of what, who was here, who this was home for, and enslaved people that worked it, blood that was shed on it, things like that. And sometimes it's not for everyone, but those people have been thinking about this for a while, right? Especially when you start thinking about environmentalists and folks like that. So I would say at times they're at least often more honest about what is happening to their world, if they're not necessarily immediately welcoming.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
That's a really interesting take, but yeah.
Yeah, that is so cool. That, once again, very revealing. Everything you say is like the hot tea, I'll say it. And I guess I think that answer that you so eloquently gave leads us to or my next question about outdoor influencers. There is a boom now, more so than ever, on Instagram, and mainly Instagram. With outdoor influencers becoming ever more like in the public consciousness. We have, and specifically POC, outdoor social media influencers. We have people like Wild by Gina, Nature Chola, even the drag queen Patagonia. We have all these really awesome and diverse voices. It seems like superficially, all of a sudden come to the forefront and trend. What do you think about all that?
Yeah. Bit of a social media recluse in some ways. Like, I am on it, and I love Instagram for a lot of the reasons that I think other people like Instagram. Sometimes it takes you away from the doom scrolling, and it's beautiful pictures. But in my critique is both for influencers of color and sometimes what we would consider mainstream influencers, because there's the opportunity to weaponize your privilege and sort of pass the mic. And we saw that for a second, like in June or July, but you're not seeing as many takeovers happening now. But like, so there's the opportunity to do something really interesting with social media that like happened for a second, and now we're back out of the performative allyship circle, and it will take something else, I think, for us to sort of gear up again. And I want to be optimistic and think it won't take some loss of life for us to have the conversation again. We sort of saw it a little bit with last Wednesday, but I struggle to follow influencers that aren't doing anything other than posting beautiful photos, right? If you're able to use, say, your land acknowledgement to talk about the history that happened in this place and to get people to think about their larger relationship to land. Okay. And we are all dealing with capitalism. Can you guys hear me, see me?
Now it's good. Yeah, you cut out for a hot second. But...
Oh, sorry. Okay, because I saw the panic look on your faces and I was like, oh no, what happened?
No, you're good. But when you came back, we were critiquing capitalism and I love it. We should keep going.
Okay. Yeah, no, I mean, because we are, right? We all have to sort of exist in this system right now, of figuring out how to make money. And that's tough. And so I never want to completely pick apart people that are trying to survive, particularly other people of color. But I need more than a beautiful photo. There are beautiful photos everywhere, right? I want to know your process. I want to understand a little bit more about what's drawing you to this, why you're having this conversation with this client, and why you're choosing this really beautiful photos of you against a landscape. Okay, but like, how are you making this a more just, equitable world. Maybe for some people will say, I'm posting my joy, and you rarely see Black women, you rarely see it documented, and maybe that is their method of resistance, and I can respect that. That is not necessarily my perspective on it, but I'm glad to see after years, and you still see it with y'all, I'm aging myself, Pinterest, but when you go to things like that, it's white, like, and then there's like ambiguous diversity. It's like, maybe she's tan white, maybe she's light brown. Like there's that sort of white passing. And it just, I was on an Instagram, I'll tell you, I was on Instagram, Black Diamond's Instagram, and they did their Black Lives Matter statement in June. And I scrolled through and I was like, I was like, even the finger pointing on this map, there's no body. It's just a finger, and the finger is white. And I was like, this is what we got. Okay. Sort of thing. And so I feel like these influencers of color, and like Laura Edmondson, I realized I didn't shout out there too, that I think do a really, really good job. The Black-Alatchin is one of my personal favorites. He's out of Asheville, North Carolina. And then Laura Edmondson, she has done work. She's a digital educator. And so what they do sort of with their followings, but not everyone can do the same thing. But I think a lot of people are still finding their way. But my question is, what have you done for the community or to make this a more just, equitable world when money's not in the equation, when it's not the only thing? Are you just chasing the dollar? Oh, and running Fat Chef. Her name is Latoya Shante Snell. She does a really, really good job.
It was Running Fat Chef. Sorry, I think our connection might not be great. Well, I think we're going to need to make a list of all these.
Yes.
And push them out afterwards.
It's okay.
Good. I think we got your.
Okay, I will do that.
Perfect. Yeah.
Okay.
There you go. We're good. We're back to real time. Cool.
Awesome.
Like, yeah.
Okay. Sorry.
No.
No, that was great. That was awesome. And you totally answered my follow-up question, which was going to be, what media do you actually like? But
what passes the Latria test?
Yeah. Oh. So I guess the next question, and I'm immensely curious to hear your answer on this, is in talking about labor in the wilderness, and specifically in America, just because we're in this context, I think, altogether. In America, in our past, the most pristine wilderness areas, they've been built, saved even by Black and brown bodies. Right. Post-Civil War, we had African American soldiers. The Buffalo Soldiers is our first park rangers in Yellowstone. But we have a terrible history, a terrible history of abuse of Black and brown laborers sent to places because essentially white people didn't want to go. And we're at a point now, though, where that landscape.
We'll put a pause in that question. Sorry, y'all, for the connection issues. Hopefully we can get back soon. Let me see if I can get in touch with Latria. Yeah. Great question, though, Michelle. I'm interested.
The setup was killer, yeah. Gosh.
There we go. Cool.
Hey, Latria.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
We can hear you, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, is your picture moving for anyone else?
No, I think you might still be frozen, but
we'll set up the question.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, let's try again.
Yeah, can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay. Might be back in business. Cool.
Awesome. Okay. Blah, 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 labor. Essentially, we're at a point now where paid labor in the wilderness looks trendy. You know, it's glamorized, frankly, by Instagram and by personal accounts, I think, of cool people, dirtbaggers, if you will. And at least for me, I know a personal example, like the California Conservation Corps.
Okay.
It's a program that exists today. It's a legacy of the Civilian Conservation Corps, but is wholly, you know, autonomous right now and does a lot of really awesome wilderness work. Like they build trails in Yosemite. They go out and do more of that, and you know, build steps and whatnot. And the California Conservation Corps' motto is hard work, low pay, and miserable conditions. And what's interesting, I think, the most is that its general demographics skew Black and brown, you know, as a reflection of California, if you will. Like its demographics are very much a reflection of state demographics. However, they have a very particular special wilderness division, if you will. It's called the Backcountry Crew, Backcountry Program. It's the most essentially elite program in the California Conservation Corps, and it's used almost entirely white. And I don't know how it happened, and I don't understand why that seems to be the norm for so many trail crews, conservation corps across the nation. How did we get here where, you know, before no one wanted to labor out there, you know, it's a miserable job, and all of a sudden now it's everything kids, well, it's not everything kids dream of, but it is
certain kids.
glamorous. Certain kids, everyone wants to raft guide, everyone wants to get out there, but who we see the most are white people. And so I'm curious, could you say something?
Okay, so big question. Answer what I can. If things freeze up, let me know. And mentioned it, you're like, you know, hard work, low pay. When you look at a lot of the barriers that have been put up, whether we're talking about systemic access to outdoor facilities and things like that, all of that is going to come into play when we're talking about this. Let me try turning off my video. Is that helping? Are you guys able to hear me okay?
Yeah, we hear you well right now.
Yay, nay. Okay, sorry. At least my profile photo is of the outdoors. But what I was saying about this is you're dealing with a couple of systemic, you know, issues in terms of sort of economic stability. The idea that like when I came out of college, I needed the highest paying job that I could get so that I could pay back student loans, so that I could start functioning. So the idea of being able to take a job that is hard work, low pay, and work yourself through the rank. People of color. Now, also, because I am Black, I will speak mostly to the Black experience. I never want to put words. Are you able to hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you for the most part. It's a little bit better than it was.
Okay, got it. Okay, I'm sorry about that.
No worries.
But
you're down there.
Yeah. But I didn't have, in my experience, I didn't have that luxury. Many of my peers did not have the luxury to be able to do something like that, right? And to get to this elite level, often you have to grind things out for several seasons. I know that's how it is with, the National Park Rangers. I have a couple of friends that are doing that, and they're struggling with it because they're like, I need to make more money and things like that. So some of that is going to be the concern. And I know the Smokies, they're working on addressing a couple of those issues with grants and like community collaborations in order to get people. Again, we had a very strong CCC presence here in the South, but due to segregation, of course, the history of these corps, all white, right? And in some ways, that is probably the case with some of these elite corps in California, and those have not changed much. And so it's a mixture of like, these are the barriers. And then you also have to be able to be competent doing this sort of work. If you're on an elite squad, you already have to have the skills, you have to have the know-how, and that's great. But they may also have to try to figure out how to use those skills for more physically solid jobs at that point. So I know it's not a great answer to your question, but like, yeah, when you said hard work, low pay, and I was like, nope, no one can do that. Or not everyone can do that.
How is our video coming to you right now? And would it be at all helpful if we cut our video on your end of like bandwidth things, or?
I am not sure. So Michelle's was off because I can't tell when I stop because I'm not glitchy. You guys are okay, but right now you're live to me.
Okay.
So I'm not quite sure what's going on because it was great for most of the time.
Yeah. Well, we hear you really well right now.
Oh,
I don't know if this is like playing with fire, but if at some point, if the connection stays stable and you want to restart video and come back on, but if it's good, maybe we'll.
Okay.
Well, do you want to stay on just so people aren't looking at a blank screen, or?
Sure,
okay.
Of course.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Cool.
I will let you guys. I will leave it as it is because everything is working right now.
That's true.
I just want to make sure that people have a chance to ask questions and stuff, and don't want to kind of mess with it too much.
Definitely. Well, I guess we do have a couple more questions for you then, but we do want to take it to Q&A eventually. One, maybe kind of briefly, if you could touch on. So Michelle's question was definitely centered around labor in the outdoors. And I think we can definitely, whether we're viewing the outdoors as a space of recreation or of labor, those are two very different orientations. But you do come from a family of farmers. And so I guess I'm just kind of wondering, as somebody who operates in both spheres, if you could talk a little bit about the difference and the sort of the attitudes that maybe each orientation for you kind of brings up, or which, I don't know if you have a preference necessarily, but just the tension there in your experience.
Yeah. So I know some of you all have read my work, but some of you haven't. But fifth generation farmer based in South Carolina. My family has been on the land that they're currently on now for over 100 years, which, given the South's history of racial terror, sharecropping, and a lot of the economic disadvantages of people, sort of make us a rarity. And most of the time I spent outdoors as a child was with my dad, right? You're either fishing, it's doing something in order to get food. This idea of sort of just hiking and not necessarily receiving anything, but also not being stewards of the land, right? Like when you summit a mountain, what do you get from that? How are you caring for the ground that you're standing on? How are you caring for your planet? We're asking that question now. But obviously, being a farmer, you have a very different relationship with the land, because if you overuse it, there's nothing for you to take from it. So you always have to be constantly putting back. And we were, I laugh because I'm like, we were farm to table before it was cool and people were winning James Beard Awards for it. Because you had to make everything into something so that you made it through winter. If there were vegetables that you didn't eat, you had hogs or animals and you fed them what we called slop, which is literally just fermented fruits and vegetables, right? And then when winter comes, it's hog killing time and you sort of portion that out. So our relationship in that way is very, very different. And then second, when you wanted to wander the woods, we didn't really have hiking trails or anything like that because it's 100 acres of family land. And so, my grandmother lives in the center, an aunt and uncle live on each side. My dad's farm is next to my uncle's farm. And then up the hill, we have like 6 or 7 cousins, and they each have their own place, right? So this idea of like people just waltzing through is just not something that sort of happens. So this idea of creating trails for what? So you wandered through, but you knew where the crabapple trees were, you knew where the pecan trees were, and things like that. And when the blackberries are ripe, or you're looking for a poke salad or something like that. So even when you are out in the space just being in nature, often you wanted to come back with something because it was advantageous to you, right? And like the idea, grocery stores are about 35 to 40 minutes away, right? The nearest Walmart is an hour away. So it's not one of those things where you can just kind of like pop to the corner store and go buy things, right? So it is an incredibly rural area. So now I think a lot about, because I do sort of hike or at least wander, every week. And I'm so drawn to flowers right now. I've always loved them. My grandmother was obsessed with them. But I was like, what are they, this idea over the last year I've been thinking about, it's like, what are they giving me? What am I giving them back? Right? They're giving me beauty, but sort of that tenuous relationship, and like, what are they giving me back? Because this is not necessarily something that I farm. So like there are sticky points in my perspective that I'm still sort of grappling with. But yeah, when I think about the world at large and sort of wandering through the woods, I'm like, how am I giving back to this place? And sometimes the best answer I have is that I can replicate this place for people that cannot come to it, so that they see it as somewhere worth protecting. So that's a lot of the conservation and environmental work I write. Some of that is bylined, some of it is not bylined, but making people feel either about the place they live or about the country that they currently inhabit, and getting them to see a part of themselves and get them to see themselves as a part of the planet in order to make things different for all of us.
That was extraordinarily beautiful. I love that sort of way of mapping the land that you're on, as opposed to like, trailblazes, but like looking for like this certain tree or something that kind of speaks to, just a different way of relating. So, and also, we were asking about labor, but really at the end of the day, the labor that you're doing as a journalist is yet just another way of being on land and working along with it. So, and stewarding it at the end of the day with your work. So yeah, really appreciate what you shared. I think before we move into a Q&A with the audience, we want to do a quick hot take lightning round. This is especially brought to you by Michelle.
I'm glad you can't see my face.
Yeah, we won't see like a look of shock if anything crazy comes up. But I think we'll just do a few to make it brief so we can move on to crowd Q&As. But I'll kick us off with the worst camping food in your opinion.
Apple cobbler, because there was this.
You tried that
apple cobbler and it was mush.
Yep.
It never solidified, and I was like cold and hungry, and it's what I had. So I ate it, but I regretted it.
All right, Michelle, fire on off.
Okay, projected Super Bowl winner.
Ooh. I don't know. I don't have a dog in the fight this year.
That's fair.
And so I've just like turned it off. Yeah, I was like it's been a bit of a moral conundrum, because sports, there was this quote that like sports is the reward for society behaving properly, right? And that's not what's happening right now. And I just can't, given everything that's happening right now, the fact that college and professional teams are playing, I can't look. So I've not been able to invest in it this year.
All right. What about free solo?
Terrifying. As someone that is terrified of heights, incredible cinematography, not a chance. Like, I mean, I had to pull out my inhaler because I was hyperventilating as I watched the film, and it takes incredible strength in order to do some of like the finger holes. Like, I have friends that climb, and I understand what it takes in like bouldering and things like that. And I was like, nope, would not catch. 10 out of 10 would rather do an ultra. Like, I'm a half marathoner. I was like, I would rather try the Barkley, which is a really notorious ultra marathon, than do that, just because like I struggle with heights.
I feel that. Also, I hear you about the like lack of air thing. I think I watched it on an airplane and already was like at high
no
oxygen. I was like, anyways, I need to ask for like a paper bag after that. Okay, this is the last question of the speed round. And so if you all out there in the audience have your own questions, get ready, start formulating them so they're nice and pretty, ready for us to ask. But my last question that I want to ask, which we're going to ask to all of our Changemakers speakers, is to end on a positive note. What is one thing that's sustaining you right now?
Oh, that's such a good one.
Thanks.
Oh. The one thing that's sustaining me right now is that tomorrow will be different. And I say this, and I don't normally sort of get into this, but I've just been sort of in this slightly vulnerable place in life. One, seeing, I cut my teeth as a reporter during most of the Trump presidency. And so seeing everything that's unfolded this year has been a challenge. And then seeing the fires in California and the pandemic and everything that has happened to us, and like trying to process it as we all are. And then also trying to deal with my own like depression, because that's something we like, especially at Dartmouth, did not talk about, was mental health. And I have always tried to look at my life as an adventure story, right? And just when things seem the darkest and you don't know that there's going to be a way out, like something else is going to change, right? There's going to be a different narrative line, and you want to follow that. And tomorrow will be different, and you'll find something worthy in it. And that has been the hardest thing to hold on to, given the fact that we are like month 11 into something that people thought would last for 6 weeks, right? But their beauty and brutality are often wrapped together, and I'm still seeing the endurance and the resilience in my peers that keep showing up every day, in myself, and understanding that like the world is changing and we're part of it. And so that's the thing that like makes me stick around, right? There's so much that I like want to see and understand and do. And I know the things that I'm feeling right now will not necessarily be the things that I feel tomorrow or in a week, or even sometimes you guys can't see it because my video isn't on, but I have this little timer. And sometimes I live my life in 15-minute increments when like things, either I'm trying to get work done or I'm trying to get through sometimes like overwhelming feelings and things like that. Because I don't think we acknowledge that enough this year, just how hard and needing that. Because like hope feels very trite, right? This idea of overcoming sounds really good when we're talking about, an Olympian or some tangible thing, some tangible barrier that you can get over. But when your worst enemy is yourself, it takes on a different perspective. So that's what's getting me through right now.
And I appreciate that answer a lot. Thank you for your thought. And though I know that Michelle and I have a ton more questions to ask, wish we could stay here all night, we do want to open it up to others as well. So we have a couple of questions coming in right now from the Q&A. Michelle, you want to pick the first one?
Yeah, I think we can start with Eva's awesome question. She says that you have her dream job. Score. I think, yeah, great question is tips on pitching to environmental publications as a beginning freelance writer. I'm working on a pitch for Outside. I would love any tips / insider info.
Yeah. Okay. So whenever I do, and this works for anything or just about anything, whenever you're thinking about what sort of email you're trying to send, like you're always like, what is the function of what I'm trying to do right now? And so for those of y'all that don't know, a pitch is often an email to an editor that's, got sort of the meat. You're like, I have this idea. This is the research I've done on it. Would you like to purchase this story for me? Here are my credentials, right? Mm-hmm. And I teach a class like on pitching, and I was like, my editor at ESPN got 300 emails a day, and her job was to read through those emails to find the best stories, right? And so she's not going to be able to read something that's 1,700 words long or something that gets to too sort of circular, right? So like every single pitch I always send in is like who, what, when, where, why, and then my word count and then the projected deadline. Like that way when they open it up, I'm like, hey, this is what I do, this is who I am. And at the end, I always have this why I'm the person to write this story. Right? Because you bring something to the table. Often reporting is thought of as an objective thing. We've realized over the last 4 years that that is not the case. Your personal experiences, your blind spots, and your privileges are going to be the things that influence what readers eventually get from a story. So I have to use that instead of seeing it as a detriment. I have to figure out what I know or what gives me sort of insider track access to make this worth it, right, for them. And I think that that's for just about any industry that you go into. It's like, what is my perspective on this? Why will people find this valuable from me? And that was something. So that Josh Norman story, the first story I ever wrote, 10,000 words, didn't know what I was doing, completely terrified. The week before my story comes out, another story on Josh Norman comes out. And I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do or whatever. I just have to be like, I did my job, right? And this is not any sort of diss, but like my perspective was very different because Josh Norman grew up across the lake from my ancestral home. So I knew Greenwood, I knew Newberry very differently from this writer that was coming from another part of the country. So it's like, what do you have that is considered insider knowledge that you can use for that? So like that's on sort of pitch, because like give them the info right up front before you ever go into your 400 words, and then like that matters. So favorite pubs, it's a little bit different for everyone, but folks that can tell you when they're going to pay you and have a tiered, like this is what we pay when you start this. And that's something I've respected about Outdoor Retailer, which is on the trade magazine side of the industry. But they're like, after so many pieces, you will become a contributing editor. This is what we pay you when you start out. Pay transparency. And that's something I didn't talk about with influencers because we had technical issues. But, people being able to talk about money in this industry matters. And it's not something, I'm not doing this solely to pursue my creativity. I cannot eat exposure. And so any editor that's a straight shooter with me immediately has my attention. And so if they accept a pitch, but they won't tell you how much they'll pay you or when they'll pay you, that may not be necessarily the best place for you, because everybody has to function in this capitalist society. So asking those questions and not being afraid to ask those questions. Because for a long time, I was like, the money is just like the bonus. No. The byline is the bonus. The money is the big thing. Like getting your words out there is incredibly important and can be very fulfilling. And so I'm not going to take that away from people, but understand that like for most of these places, those people are getting paid. They're getting paid regularly and they're getting paid on time. And your work is worth it to ask those same things.
Thank you for that answer. We do have more questions that have come in from the audience. And I think, Latria, if you're okay with staying a couple minutes beyond the hour, if that's cool with you.
Oh yeah, I'm fine.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, well, but to the rest of you out there, just to be mindful of your time, we are at 6:00, but clearly there's still so much more wisdom to be dispensed. So if you want to keep hanging out with us, we'd love for you to do that. And we're going to stay on this call for a little while longer. But first, we just wanted to give a huge thank you to all of y'all for coming tonight, and also to everyone who sponsored this event, who plugged it on their network.
Thank you.
Yeah, major thank you. And to the Sustainability Office and the DOC for funding. And then the last thing, as a quick little plug, is that this is a 4-part series for environmental changemakers. So for the next 3 Wednesdays at the same time, 5 p.m., we'll be having a couple different individuals come and talk about their careers making change in environmental fields. Next week is Alyssa White, who is currently studying and working in environmental law at Yale, which is super cool. So yeah, thank you all. And finally, the biggest thank you is to Latria for joining us tonight and gracing us with your time and your wisdom. We appreciate you so much.
Of course. I'm glad that you all asked me, and for the Dartmouth folk. I know not everyone is Dartmouth folk. I am glad a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about, both in terms of sort of land education wisdom, felt like it wasn't valued when I was at Dartmouth, and I was ashamed of it. I was very uncomfortable being a farmer's daughter, and so it's a very enriching feeling, I think, maybe to be back now and talking about some of this. So I am glad that we are having some of the discussions that I could not have when I was a student.
Well, I guess they say once you're a Dartmouth student, you're always a Dartmouth student. So
you're always learning, and you're always
certainly happy to have you back and, you know, have your thoughts on this discussion, because they've been really like inspiring so far.
Yeah.
Yeah. And well, somewhat related, I think, specifically about your relationship with the outdoors. Actually, Abigail asked a question I think is really relevant to what you were speaking on. She said, how did you experience, how did you experience the outdoors at Dartmouth? And did your relationship with the outdoors change after coming to Dartmouth or after you left?
Okay. So again, coming from a rural, not doing multi-day trip sort of thing, like and if you've read We're Here, You Just Don't See Us, I talk about my family being sort of day trippers whenever we engage with the outdoors. We're not sort of taking tents and going places. And like when you have a farm, you have farm animals, and they don't appreciate not being fed daily. And so you have to have someone that's like, you know, going to slop your hogs for your things. It's easier when, again, it's a family compound. And somebody else can sort of do it for you. But like we were not taking off and going to the Grand Canyon. I've actually still not been to it. So when I got to Dartmouth, Spartanburg and Newberry are at the foothills of the mountains. So I'm about 22 miles from the mountains, so I can see them in the distance, but I'm not actively engaging in them. And so I get to New Hampshire, you know, I come up for Prosby weekend, right? And there's still snow on the mountains, and you're like, oh, that's a lot of great. You know, it is a very different landscape. And you're like, am I? And they warn you about the moose, right? Like coming from the South, you know, we've got deer, but that's like the extent of it. You're like, am I gonna die up here? Like you think about the combination of stuff, and you know, you learn that you won't. But I did a DOC trip, and so that was my first major multi-day hiking. You know, I think we hiked probably about 20 miles on that trip or something like that. And like that is not in my experience, and my hiking boots from Kmart did not hold up to the rigors of that, right? Again, this is one of those things that like when you don't know and you get the list, you do the best you can with what you have, but like nobody is handing me out Merrell boots for, you know, my first excursion and things like that. So I did the DOC trip. At that point, the DOC was majority white, if not completely white. And it felt like it was a distraction when you wanted to be pre-med. And I don't know if you all went in knowing exactly what you wanted to do and having the perfect schedule, and it's got to line up in order for this thing to happen, and you know, want a triple minor in this thing. Like a lot of that was sort of set up for people. And I got there and I floundered, and I was like, I definitely don't have time to enjoy myself when I'm supposed to be sort of taking this intellectually rigorous path. And so I didn't spend that much time extracurricularly outside, but my classes, so I took Laura Conkey, I don't think she's there, I think she's professor emeritus now. I took her geology class, and we hiked Mount Washington, right? Wow. We had to keep a journal talking about and I don't know if Professor Terry Osborne was an environmental writer at the time, and he was a big deal. Are you all able to hear me?
Yeah, it's a little choppy, but yes, you're back now.
Okay, got it. Y'all froze for a second, which gave me sort of an indicator. But so, you know, in doing that, I took Dan Kotlowitz's lighting design course, and we had to take a landscape and translate it through the lights in the theater. And first he had us do it as a piece of art, and I had wandered around all night and couldn't find anything that I really wanted to capture that way. And then I caught the dawn coming up over the hop and ended up doing that. And that was one of my favorite pieces of art. I do not consider myself an artist, but wandering around campus at odd hours due to anguish about who I was supposed to be as an adult led me to spending a lot of time outdoors. I walked Ockham Pond a lot. I sat in front of Baker Berry and stared at the sky. I will never, ever, ever forget seeing the northern lights from the roof of my dorm in East Wheelock. So it comes around, I think, again, for you guys in 2024 will be the next time that it's like super visible from Hanover. But like looking at the sky and being like, what is this green flash? And having, our UGA take us to the roof and like seeing those things and understanding that there was a world so much larger than the one that I was raised up in, where we were very knowledgeable about the stars and sky and weather patterns, but there was still so much that I didn't know and that I don't know. Like that is like, that's one of the grand things is like there's so many places that I haven't seen and explored and stuff that I haven't experienced that I like look forward to now that I didn't have the capacity for pre-Dartmouth. After Dartmouth, moved to New York City. I lived in Harlem. I worked on the Upper East Side. There's 79 blocks in between. When you're making minimum wage, you save a lot of money and you walk, right? So I would like take the bus to the train to work and I would walk back and I would walk through Central Park. And so I would skirt Harlem Mirror. One of my favorite things to do was take a library book and hide behind this waterfall and read back there on my way home. Because I would like finish work maybe around 2 or 3 o'clock. Usually when students were getting out of school, I would already be behind the waterfall. So my engagement with nature was very different. The idea of urban avians was very, very different for me. And sort of this idea of bird watching in this space. It felt very closed off for someone that is used to big, wide, open spaces. Dartmouth, Hanover is rural. Spartanburg and Silver Street are pretty rural. So it was a different place for me, and it felt like I couldn't escape to the places I wanted to be in. So my relationship with nature is always changing, right? Because even though I'm back home now, I've had more experiences and I've got a greater, deeper understanding for places. Like even if I'm going to, my backyard and I've grown the same things and the rhododendrons are there that were there when I was a kid, it still looks different looking at it from a child versus looking at it from an adult perspective. And so there are a lot of things that I've turned over and I'm still turning over in my mind. So I don't expect, I think I'll forever be infatuated with it. I don't think that it's going to be one of those things where I'm like, oh, I've seen that before, because even seeing something that I've seen before is a reassurance. And I wrote about that and seeing rhododendrons in the Smokies, like as sort of this like survival. We were sort of in the early grips of the pandemic and like what rhododendrons meant to me at this moment, because it was one of the first plants I identified as a kid. Right. And now I'm an adult and I'm surviving a very, very different thing, and the memories that are tied to some of that, sometimes the nostalgia, sometimes the painful parts. So yeah, that was a long answer to your question.
No, but I mean, there's a lot of parts to it, so all super necessary.
Definitely. We have another question from Edel. She asks, you talked as we were starting up that time that time has been functioning differently for you during these times, that Dartmouth time also operates differently. How has your perception of time or urgency changed over the course of your life, especially as it relates to social justice?
Once upon a time, I thought that we could solve this. Like when I first started my career, I thought that my role was to be an illuminator, or was to be a problem solver. It's like, this is what's happening, and like I thought it was my job to sort of tell, right? And now I realize my job is more of an illuminator, and it's like, here are the things that are rendered in 3D, and you have to decide how you feel about them, and hopefully you feel obligated to fix them by seeing the humanity or seeing the crisis in the moment, right? It's a very, very different place to be. when I started my career, any op-eds and things that I did about social justice usually came together fairly quickly. It would be something where an editor would ask me to do something, and in 6 hours it would be live for the Guardian, right? Or I'd go report something, and as the plane's taking off from Flint back home, I'm working on a draft. And I realized that this job takes a toll on you. And if you aren't careful, you can get burnt out on it, because it's very disheartening to see people settle into the comfortable. Like there are very few things that have upset me in my life, like the performative black boxes. Like I think that was maybe the biggest disappointment that I've ever had from humanity facing major crises like this, right? And maybe I would say Hurricane Katrina was the first major like systematic government failure of my life, right? But we didn't have Twitter, we weren't on Facebook. Like it was a very different situation. So like in terms of that, like being the major disaster, that would be it. But the twin issue of racism plus the pandemic has made this year like definitely number two, and to see, wow, this is how we're going to react to it, huh? Right? And everybody's comfortable and everybody's gone back to I put normal in quotes because the way that we live should not necessarily be normal. But yeah, it feels like, and I wrote this in an Instagram post earlier this week, that I'm living my life on loop. What people had to say last week, the shock that they had about the vitriol that people had at the Capitol, I've been living with those types of threats of violence and destruction the whole time I've had this job. Right? So that doesn't surprise me. And I had nothing new to say about it for people that wanted me. They were like, and I was like, I don't know what you're expecting from me, but I don't have it to give it to you because I've lived this moment already, right? The idea that we're in the streets again after George Floyd. I was there when we were in the streets for Walter Scott and for the gentleman in Charlotte with traumatic brain injury. I'm blanking on his name right now, and I really shouldn't be. But so these moments just keep sort of happening and happening and happening, and I'm not numb to them, but I realize that what I have to do now is not speak to one specific incident, but speak to the larger scope and timeline of what's happening in America, right? Because like at that point I was reactionary and I'm reacting to an event that happened earlier that day or earlier that week. And now I'm sort of unwinding this big spool of time. And I'm saying, okay, this is what's happening, right? And like, this is what has happened. And yes, this is not new, but let me take you back to 1920, to this idea of the Klan being the law and the law being the Klan, and how people felt just as helpless when the things that they considered sacred were being decimated. Mm-hmm. And here's how I hope you understand they got through it, and these are some of the things that we can do to keep it from happening again. So yeah, so time does function very, very differently, but I realize like I will be doing this job for the rest of my life. And so I have to pace myself. And I think you guys saw them. The people can't see the tattoos right now because I have my video off, but I have on the palms of my hand, underneath my pinky, I have the words "good trouble," which was something that John Lewis said. He said, get in good trouble, necessary trouble. And I realized my hands are my tools, and this is what is required of me. It was what in some ways was required of him, and I admired him greatly. And I have decided that like, this is where I'm going to spend my days. Like, even if I am writing about food, there's a social justice bent to it or an equity bent to it. And I acknowledge it. I used to wrestle with it, and now I'm like, it just is. And either they want it or they don't. And I'm going to deal with that,
Yeah, mm-hmm. Absolutely. And to do that as a freelance writer, though, in addition, where you are in a bit of precariousness, but to still nonetheless like assert your beliefs, like that's super admirable. It's very cool.
Thank you.
Totally.
Yeah. another question that rolled in from Emma. She asked if you feel that your relationship with the outdoors has changed or evolved since you began writing about it, and if so, how? And I'm also really interested in learning how, like, because writing is an art form in a way, and an expressive form, if that has been sort of iterative, excuse me, with your relationship with nature.
Yeah, I know the names of things now in a way that I didn't before. So we have, it is the yellow-throated warbler, but the entire time growing up, people called them butterbutts. That is not the name. I mean, obviously, like it makes sense. Or wait, no, it's the yellow-rumped warbler, but they call them butterbutts. And they're some of the first birds to come in the spring. You're like, oh, the butterbutts are here. Like, yes, if you are writing a particular type of piece, you can do that and say that. But you know, depending on what you're going for, sometimes knowing the names of species, understanding their habitat, why they are where they are, what it means when they disappear. So right now I'm doing a piece that ties in the lead poisoning in Flint to the lead poisoning happening to bald eagles and how we're killing our national symbol as well as our citizens. You know, so it's seeing that and understanding exactly what is happening to the shells of bald eagles in a way that, like, I could not have delved into. I wrote this Flint piece in 2017, I think, 2017. Yeah, that sounds right. And I did not have that perspective. I've spent much, much, much more time in nature afterwards. My residency in the Smokies, I learned a lot more about wildflowers and getting to explore certain places and spaces. I'm on observations, changes in terrain right now. So I pre-pandemic was on the road about 6 months out of the year, 4 to 6 months out of the year. So that is part of the reason I'm coming to you from my childhood home. There's no reason to like maintain an apartment when you live on the road, right? And so in doing that, I get to travel a lot of places, and that means I get to hike a lot of spaces and see a lot of different landscapes. And I can use things like iNaturalist, and I'm like, oh, what is, you know, the genus name for this, and things like that. So the curiosity was always there. I just have the accessibility in terms of being able to answer some of my questions in a different way. And I think now I have more patience. I was a terrible bird watcher when I was younger because I have zero patience, right? And so now I'm willing to sit and notice things in a way that when I was a Dartmouth student, it felt like I was always like, go, go, go. I'm always behind.
Can relate.
Always behind. And that is such an adrenaline inducing, but like panic crushing way to live. And I don't have any answers for how it gets better because I still find myself gripped in moments of panic about being behind, but I'm willing to contemplate a peony now, right? In a very, very different way, and try to find peace in it or understand how it progresses, right? I think about growth a lot. I had a friend I was on the phone with, and she's like, you're growing into yourself, but it's not like, you know, she's like, it's more like a redwood and less like a rose, right? It's not, there's not a terminus to this thing. You're always constantly expanding and growing. It's not something that will bloom and die. And I was like, I have never thought about it that way. And I thought that was a really, so some of that comes from conversation with other nature writers and things like that. So it's a mix. It really, truly is a little bit of everything, but it definitely changes. I think about like words and you know, when we're talking about the warblers, I was like yellow, but like you get specific. You're like, what color yellow? What kind of, you start thinking about things that way. I don't really do a lot with metaphor or things like that, but I really think about sort of parts of language and descriptors and like what this description can do for the piece, how it really builds a world in a way that I was unable to when I first started. I was so I felt like I needed to have every fact, and everything should be factual. That's not what I'm saying, but I felt like I needed to be like, here's everything that I know about this thing, and I need you to know it too. And oh, I'm over my word count, and you have no, there's no substance there. There's no image for you to hold on to.
For sure.
So now I'm like, how do I take this fact and affix it to an image or a scene that helps you understand something about yourself and the situation.
Definitely.
That's really cool. I mean, this ties into the question that was just asked recently about time. And like, from hearing what you're saying, it sounds that being in nature has sort of, and like having to sit with it and think about like how to properly communicate it, or to do so in a way that is meaningful, I guess, for your readers, has like in some ways altered like your experiences of time, which is super cool.
Yes, because I struggled with meditation. I took it as a PE course when I was at Dartmouth, and I was so mad when I left that class every week because I thought about all the things I could have been doing while I was sitting on the floor supposed to be meditating, and like that doesn't happen as much now.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Our last few questions, our last question is just about writing. Again, from Eva, the aspiring writer. And she's wondering, what are your favorite publications to work with, and which ones would you recommend to young writers?
Yeah.
And I think environmental themed. Yeah.
So I really respect, I've not published with them, but I respect their editorial board, and someone that I'm looking into. Because some days I still feel like I'm a newbie. And that was something that I would tell you, is like every piece I start over. Yes, I have this cachet and history behind me, but I really go into every piece like I have something to prove, like I'm a newbie again. So, and that's like when I do outdoor retailer, I'm like, give me the grunt work. I want to learn how to do these parts that I don't understand. So some certain things just get faster, but every assignment you do, you're always going to feel like a newbie because you're not writing the same, unless you're writing for every cereal company in the world and you're always writing like copy about cereal. Certain things are gonna come faster, but you're always really starting from scratch as a freelancer. But I love Orion, High Country News. I'm trying to think of a lot. The market is collapsing a little bit on itself. In terms of in the middle of a pandemic, can some of these publications sustain themselves? Sierra is a good one. The National Parks Magazine, if you've got a really interesting angle for certain things. Outside, and they know this, I don't think this is unfair to say. Outside is a hard nut to crack. I have like a 92% pitch acceptance rate. My pitch acceptance rate with them is 33%. So just because something doesn't work for a particular place, or and they usually, my pitches for them, once they're like, okay, we want to hear more about it, those pitches are like 1,700 words. They really want to know exactly how this is going to be executed. Like it's a very different, but they're also, I will say that for print, but starting some places that are digital often helps. The pay is usually a little bit lower. So if you're getting $1 or $2 a word in print, sometimes digital will start at like 50 cents a word, just to give you some idea. Every publication is going to be different, but don't be afraid to ask. I've had a lovely experience with more often for nature and travel there. The other thing that I will say, like, nature publications are great, and I'm not taking anything from them, but nature stories also fit in general. If you're able to do the job well, like Vice just ran a profile on Karina Newsom, who is a Black bird watcher, about the education programming that she does, right? And that's very much a mainstream place. So don't think you have to, just because you're writing about nature does not necessarily mean that you have to pigeonhole yourself into some of these places. And the other thing that I'll recommend, if you are into books about nature and things like that, book reviews got me through graduate school in some ways. In the sense that, like, you read the book, you review it for a magazine. Usually it's only 150 to 250 words for short things. But it gets your foot in the door. It's a front of the book piece. You're not trying to pitch a whole long reported feature. It shows them that you can write, that you understand the concepts of a book. It gets you a byline, and they know that you can turn work in on time and behave as conduct yourself as a professional. So those sorts of things, don't be afraid to take those small things, like the breaking news stories that I gave the poets that did the Black Excellence issue for Outdoor Retailer. I think they were like maybe 300 words, right? And some people would be like, oh, that's not, a big enough thing, for me or whatever. It gave them a byline, it shows them, and I will write recommendations for those people. And I'm like, look, they showed up, they did the job, they did this thing, that it has to be the big feature in order to, because when I started in print, I started in front of the book, 450 word pieces about art. Are you able to hear me?
Oh, I think you're back now. Yeah. I think we're getting your audio.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah. I hope some of that came
out. Sorry, can you hear us right now? Are we good?
Yes, I can.
Okay, amazing, cool. Sweet. Well, thank you for answering all those questions. And I have to run to class now. So but we have really loved having you with us, and thank you for staying and giving so much thought to each of the questions that was asked. That's really special. And clearly, as we've been talking about time a lot, you are super generous with yours. So we can't thank you enough. And thank you to everyone who stuck around until the end and gotten some extra nuggets of wisdom. We appreciate y'all being here. But yeah, everyone have a wonderful evening. And again, catch us next Wednesday. And take care of yourselves as well.
Yeah. Thank you guys again. And I look forward to being on the audience side next week and learning. So thank you guys again for taking the time to listen to what I had to say and for asking such incredible questions.
Of course. Bye everyone. Have a good night. I guess I'll stop recording now.